let me just state for the record. So this is the Affordable Housing Coalition for June 25th, 2021. And we're starting our discussion on the agenda item ForEveryone Home. And we have 3 coalition members present at the moment. So with the ForEveryone Home framework, then we ended up with the 2 documents. Again, one to go over the assessment and the recommendations, and then that one recommendation that was taken out and kind of built out as an action item. So what we did when bringing that to council, which and 1 and 2, both of these bullets are kind of intermingled in a sense. But what we did was we brought the documents forward to council for consideration. And I did a PowerPoint that I would like to show you all. And what we did was, in that council item, we requested not only adoption of those recommendations and also adoption of us starting to work on that action item, which was to create a land bank. But we also asked that this be used as one of the 2 major, or really 3 major pieces of work to help us on the path to creating a 10-year housing plan. And so those were all of the things that were part of the council resolution that passed. As part even of our discussion on the 10-year housing plan, it was also going to incorporate a look at the continuum of care. So the network of how we provide services to those experiencing homelessness. And in a separate item that went to council committee last week, it was an information item, we brought to them our plan to issue a request for proposal for a consultant to help us do an assessment of our continuum of care, or our COC. Looking at service provision, governance, basically top to bottom. Where are we strong? Where are there opportunities? Such that with that assessment of the COC, as we look at developing the 10-year housing plan, how we support persons experiencing homelessness is folded into that 10-year housing plan. The theory here is, you don't have housing for those experiencing homelessness in one silo, and then you have the rest. It's all homes, right? The issue with homelessness is a lack of housing. So it only made sense to intersect have those 2 intersect. So I don't know why, I'm still getting emails from folks trying to join. Excuse me 1 second. So it seems everyone in City Hall is having trouble joining. So now they're starting to wonder if there's something going on in City Hall, because various offices aren't able to connect. So anyway, so we kind of married all of this together to create that framework. And so where we would use the ForEveryone Home report, we would use the information we received from the Center for Community Progress on vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties. And we have our housing study and needs assessment from 2018. Now we have kind of like a body of work, and we have some policy recommendations that we could also employ. So if you are able to indulge me, I can show you the PowerPoint that we used let's see. Are you able to see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So let me see here. Now, make sure my computer moves like it should. All right. So of course, you're aware who Grounded Solutions is. Haven't had an opportunity to visit with Matt previously, so I don't really need to kind of go back over that. Of course, just remembering that they're a national nonprofit. And so this was our team. And again, we launched ForEveryone Home in June of 2019 to protect affordability and diversity in growing cities, of course, and especially those that were having concerns about potential displacement pressures and how do you get out ahead of those displacement pressures. If you'll recall, it was a competitive application process, and we were one of the 3 cities selected, Indianapolis and San Antonio being the other 2. And of course, these are 4 of the 5 members of our team. This is when we had our kickoff meeting with the other cities in San Antonio. And so missing from this was James Perry. He was unable to join us for that particular event. And as you can see, we got the program started in the summer of 2019. We did the needs assessment, and that's when you all spoke with Matt. He presented information from the needs assessment. Of course, we had a little delay in working on that anti-displacement agenda because of COVID, because we were actually supposed to have ended the program at the end of last year. And so now we did the wrap up with council. Just some reminders about the process. We wanted to make sure we had good community engagement, the peer learning with our other cities. We made sure that we used a racial equity lens in looking at not only the challenges, but what the potential policy solutions could be. And central to that also was making sure that we had lasting affordability. Like I mentioned, we kicked it off in San Antonio. So now you see kind of like the whole group of everyone who came from those cities, as well as the Grounded Solutions staff. So as a group with the various trainings, we did online trainings and peer learning opportunities in addition to the in-person event we had July of 2019. These were a lot of the different kinds of things that we discussed. Of course, you see that the members of the teams went to the Vacant Properties Conference in Atlanta. That was in October of 2019 that they did that. And a few folks even had the opportunity to go to Albany after the conference. They were celebrating, I think, their 50th anniversary of the nation's first community land trust. So some folks who were there for the Vacant Properties Conference did the side trip to Atlanta. So from the needs assessment, it looked at the racial equity gap, what they call the equity dividend, and then what we saw as areas of concern. So the racial equity dividend is actually, what is that difference in either value of homes or the amount of earnings that we would see in Winston-Salem if some of the barriers were removed and we did have actual equity in our community. And there's more detail about that in the actual report that you all have. So when we looked at some of those areas where the areas of concern and how we could potentially address them, of course, for displacement issues, displacement pressures, we looked at establishing a trust fund. And there's been talk about establishing a housing trust fund here. One thought has been potentially using another bond referendum and using dollars to go into a trust fund in conjunction with collaborating with other possible investors in the community, be it from the banking arena to some of our local foundations, some of our major healthcare employers who have said they are interested in investing in affordable housing. So there's some early talk going on about that. Requiring the lasting affordability in anything that the city invests in. And so one of the policy considerations that's under development, and I think I've touched on this previously, as one example, is if city-owned land is part of a deal. If we sell the land for affordable housing development, and while we call it affordable housing development, it's actually mixed income development, but the majority of the units will be affordable. If we're selling the land, then we're looking for 50 years of affordability. If we lease the land, then we're looking for 99 years of affordability. So we're looking at different possible strategies to bake in long-term affordability when we're using city property and significant city subsidies. And those timeframes are similar to what some other communities around the country are doing. There was talk about establishing a community land trust. Obviously, that's a community-led process. That's nothing the city would do. We looked at how we would increase or strengthen, as this says, our inclusionary housing policies. So right now, we have like a density bonus provision, but nobody uses it because folks are able to kind of build what they want the way they want without tapping into our density bonus provision. And so what do we need to look at policy-wise to strengthen our inclusionary policies? And then, of course, establishing a land banking program. When we talk about building an inclusive community, again, you see land banking is the #1 thing that's listed here as a policy recommendation. Consider how we change some of our zoning to allow more duplexes and triplexes and the like. You may have heard recently conversations that we've had led by the planning department around cottage court housing, right? So what we're talking about sometimes in terms of the missing middle. How do we create more housing types? As we look at the changes in family structure and composition, how do we get different types of housing units developed? How do we strengthen support for housing choice voucher holders? One of the huge challenges we're finding is that a lot of landlords won't take the vouchers. And so that's creating a real challenge for voucher holders. So how do we encourage support for them, as well as how do we extend more fair housing protection to include age and veteran status? Then just having a real focus on preserving affordable housing as another priority, and what we need to do to actually focus on preservation. So you see lasting affordability is one aspect of it, as well as obviously increasing resources for preservation. We have like a homeowner occupied rehab program currently, but how do we just have more resources generally and are able to do more? Because what we are finding is even when our council approves raising the cap on how much money we could loan to do owner occupied rehab, it went from $45,000 to $65,000. We found that in many instances, it still was not going to be enough. And so what do we do around preserving what we have? And that also kind of touches on the work that we did and it's really kind of outlined in this next section about improving the housing conditions, right? So in order to improve the housing conditions and necessarily preserve housing, what we have to have our arms around what's the real condition of our housing stock. And so the recommendation was to do a citywide housing condition assessment. If you'll recall, we did a pilot assessment, and I was really hoping Paula could join us to kind of lead that discussion. But in order to really get our arms around this, we've got to understand what we're dealing with and then be able to say, now this is the amount of money that we need. Of course, another recommendation was to have a performance-based landlord licensing system. Because one of the challenges that we're finding, and this probably isn't so much an issue like with members of your organization, John, but with some of our other landlords, is the conditions. You know, a number of the complaints we have around minimum housing code are certain groups of landlords. We know it's not all, but we have certain groups that are just challenging. And so the idea is, if there was an opportunity to do a periodic inspection to make sure those houses meet minimum housing code, that's another way to actually help preserve them. Because what we have found in some instances is there is no maintenance, and the houses get to the point where they're uninhabitable, and then they are shuttered, and then next thing you know, they're on the demolition list. So that's a big issue. John, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and I don't want to divert from this, but along those lines, we've had some experience over in Greensboro with similar issues, and we advocated for some changes to state law about 4 or 5 years ago that make proactive inspections a lot easier to do. And one of the things that we learned in Greensboro was they weren't aware of those changes, so they had not implemented some of those. So, you know, just one sidebar on this might be that we look at existing state law and see what make sure the city is aware of everything it's able to do on the inspection side. You might be. I mean, the city might already be doing it, but there are some pretty good tools available, I think, when it comes to doing proactive inspections.
Great. Yeah, let's talk offline.
Yes.
I'd be curious, because if there's some things we're missing, by all means, we need to know.
Yeah.
And step up. I appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
Of course, you know, one of the other things we're talking about is how do we just reduce our eviction rates. So obviously there are a number of items that we can consider, and we had an eviction problem pre-COVID. There's no denying that. And so how do we work better, for instance, with the magistrate's court or the eviction court? Right now, we're seeing a challenge where, even though we've had a moratorium, the eviction court has just been totally active, right? And so, you know, we have been able to get, in some instances, a hold on the eviction when it was for payment of rent. And we were able to help folks through the emergency rental assistance program. But generally speaking, we have an issue with evictions, and we need to understand what the reasons are and figure out how to either do, well, I know our human relations department does landlord tenant mediations, but developing an actual landlord academy or a prevention plan and some other items, as you see listed here, were also recommendations made by Grounded Solutions. And then moving to the action plan side of things, the recommendation was that we create that land bank and look at also formally adopting the policy on lasting affordability with those, you know, 50-year, 99-year affordability periods. One of the reasons land banking kind of came to the top was because currently during what we call the growing season, the city cuts and tries to manage over 500 parcels of land that we call chronic violators. So they're in private ownership, but the owners do not take care of them. And so they become a huge problem for the neighborhoods. So we mow those starting in about April through about early November. At significant cost. We have to hire third-party contractors to do the work. And the theory was we're already somewhat in the land banking business because we're taking care of a lot of this property. And so what can we do to actually get our hands on the property and then convert it into productive use? So, and this actually aligns right head on with one of the recommendations coming out of the report from the Center for Community Progress around vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties. Some of these properties are also on the tax foreclosure list. Some of them are heir properties. And so how do we get ourselves in alignment with the tax assessor's office in the county and figure out a way for the city to actually get ownership of these so we can put them to good use? So that could also, obviously, if we got those properties, it makes it easier to put the affordability requirements on them. And so it kind of turned into like a win-win by recommending that we go the land banking route. So that's some of the logic behind it. And of course, greater detail about it is in the report. And of course, you have now both copies of the report, the anti-displacement and inclusive growth policy agenda. And
Marla, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can we go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
I know here at Habitat, we've been having some problems with trying to get some of those abandoned houses out of the communities. Being somebody who grew up on the side of town where a lot of these are, off 14th Street, Ansonia, 25th Street, 23rd Street, those houses, I can think of 10 now, have been abandoned in an eyesore for 15 years. So is there anything that can be fast tracked to say, okay, they've been there, but you also said something that was very important, taxes. They haven't been paid in years. So how do we get with the city, the county to say, let's do something about it? Because I know when we try and acquire some of those, yes, you can, but you have to pay the back old property taxes. So right. That's something I know we can't figure out here, but I don't know any way around that. And it's very frustrating because, again, if those houses have been like that since I've been a teenager in those same neighborhoods, there hasn't been a plan to try and figure it out. And we're saying now in this group is something we're going to start trying to look at. It's just frustrating because how do we speed up the process? And I don't think that's just for us to figure out here, because obviously we can't, but can we bring maybe county commissioners to come in and talk about stuff, maybe, of course, offline, to try and figure out what we can do together. But that is something that I get asked all the time in the community. What can we do about those houses that have been abandoned for several years? So again, I know we don't have the answers here, but I get asked that question at least 2-3 times a week from people just calling in saying, hey, I know Habitat tries to buy homes in these communities, but I don't see any progress being made.
So actually, as part of the work that was done with the Center for Community Progress for that vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties initiative, it actually has some action steps in there. And a key part of that is us collaborating with the county tax assessor. And there is a tool called in-rem foreclosure that we've talked about. And actually, our city attorney is working with the tax assessor's office in the county on a couple of test cases to see how they can get the process to work smoothly. So I think there are maybe 2, no more than 3 properties, at least one of which is an heir property. And so they're trying to kind of test it out just to see how it works, what the impediments are, and certainly speed being one of them, right? So that we can kind of see how it would work if we wanted to do it in a broader scale way. So, and also one of the main recommendations coming out of the CCP report was that an interdepartmental and interdisciplinary task force be established to kind of look at all of these issues, from tax collection to heir properties, to how we track information. So our information systems, and that's both the city and the county. And I'm trying to think of another particular one that stood out, but that was around data collection and being able to track and so forth. And so that task force had its first meeting March 31st. And it was led by former Assistant City Manager Tasha Logan Ford. And so now we're working with the city manager's office around who might take leadership of that now that Tasha has moved to High Point. But the recommendation was that the leadership of that ought to be at the ACM level, because that's somebody who's has that ability and authority to pull different departments to the table. So they're looking at that. Of course, they're under a search is underway to fill that position that was vacated in her departure. So the idea is, even as we talk about the 10-year housing plan, incorporating the work that's recommended from that CCP report alongside this is going to be critical. And so one of the things that I know we'll have to talk about as we move forward is, in doing that work of the housing plan, we probably need work groups, if you will, to look at certain elements like the vacant and abandoned properties. What do we do about housing conditions and how that's spearheaded? And so, I think what we've probably done up till now is kind of pull together a lot of the data and research that kind of helps us figure out these are the different things that we're going to need to consider as we're building a plan, right? So that we don't have any gaps. Which is why, making sure that we actually talked about housing for those experiencing homelessness as the housing plan, not just a COC thing to the side. So, we are looking at how to get a hold of those properties that you spoke of, George, and how to get those into productive use quickly. And it is my expectation that by the time and I say we writ large as a community, come up with a plan, a housing plan, that will be a part of it. That's got to be a tool that we use. So, my hope is that once we're able to hit the button and say go, so to speak, with getting started with the plan, that we can really have something that we can bring to council for adoption, within 15, 18 months max. So next year, my hope is that, or before the year ends next year, we will have brought to council a plan that we would ask for adoption. And then, then we'll be about the business of implementation. And, it's the expectation too that whatever plan is developed, that it's developed with the idea that there'll be multiple players that have responsibilities and roles for the plan implementation, so that it won't just be a city plan, it's a community plan. And everybody will have a role and a function in the success of the plan. Let's see here. So
Carla, are we to not, like the distressed properties list that we have online now? Those are properties that are listed in George, specifically to your question. We have a distressed properties list on our city's website.
Mm-hmm.
On the first page, it says, I want to,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go to, I want to, I think it's the second column over, and then you pan down to like 3 or 4, and it says distressed properties. Those are properties, some of which you probably already recognize the addresses.
I do.
We have those listed. And then of course the county has its auction site. So short term, if anyone was interested, they would be contacting those owners on that list for any of the houses that they check out and see that that house is something, or several houses are what they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the county has the foresight, they already have in place on their website that auction list where people can, whether it's Habitat or whomever, can purchase properties. I've been told that sometimes, well, they do have statutorily the ability to look at the taxes and whatever the state allows the tax office to do. Sometimes there's reductions because sometimes the taxes are more than the house.
Right.
The
And
cost of the
that's
house.
part of the problem that we have, because if they have arrears of $30,000 in taxes and the property is only worth $14,000, that cuts into us trying to build affordable housing for as many people as possible. So that's where the frustration comes in, because we want to try and clean up the communities as much as we can, but a lot of the families that we have don't want to move next door to a home and pay a mortgage on their home for 30 years, but the two properties across the street have been sitting there abandoned for years, and they get tied up in the property taxes, so that's where the issues are. So that's why I always try and say, what can the city and county do to come together to try and, work on those types of problems instead of it just being a city problem or a county problem? How can we work collaboratively to, improve those things? That's all. But thank you, though.
So other discussion, questions, conversations about what we've provided. I know it was a lot of information that we sent to you on Wednesday, and it didn't come until Wednesday because we needed council to do their action on Monday night. So that was one of the reasons, because it hadn't been made public yet, and we're usually bound not to distribute information until after council's had an opportunity to see it and act on it. So that's part of the delay for actually putting it in your hands. But certainly I'm open for conversation.
I appreciated you sharing your presentation with us, and I was just going to note for the other members that I think a couple of those things can play off of each other. I mean, you referenced the Housing Trust Fund, and then later on preservation efforts, and we're seeing in other cities those two things really playing together. I shared with Marla earlier this week, the city of Wake County put out an RFP for a fund administrator to do just that. And they're going to put, I believe, $10 million into the fund, expected to be leveraged 2.5 to 3 times. And it'll be up to whomever comes back with the RFP to be the fund administrator to go out and raise the rest of that capital. But preservation is a big piece of that. It's really playing off that affordable housing trust fund concept. So I think there's some success stories elsewhere in North Carolina already that we could leverage potentially here.
That's good. Yeah, and I thank you for sending that information. The more we can know what's already happened in front of us, we know we're not having to cut a new path, and that really helps a lot. Especially, when you think about just the abundance of work that needs to be done, and being able to, borrow practices from other communities that are working is helpful. Other thoughts, ideas, discussion?
So Marla, you'd mentioned that we've talked a few times in the past that the density bonus hasn't worked as an incentive. One of the things so the Apartment Association of North Carolina, so that's our state association, last year established an affordable housing committee, because we're dealing, Winston-Salem is in the same boat with every other city in the nation, really dealing with this. One of the things, they just completed a survey of developers on what types of incentives would be most attractive to them to do affordable housing. And I don't have the results yet, but when I do get them and get permission, I'll share those, because I think, when we look at designing any of these programs, obviously we want to use as many carrots as we can to get people. So, similar to what George was saying about the back tax abatement, if we could do that, there are other incentives that are more attractive to developers than others, so if we could take that kind of information and incorporate it into some of our recommendations, I think that would be helpful. And hopefully, I will tell you that I was recruited to help recruit developers, and as you guys know, it's hard to get anybody to respond to a survey of any kind. And the vast majority of the responses to the survey came from Triad-based developers. So what I'm really happy about is we'll get some local feedback. It won't just be statewide. We'll get some good local data that we can work off of as well.
That'll be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe as we move down the path to actually soliciting folks to do development for us, because the city's looking to sponsor a number of developments, by putting out RFPs and so forth, because we figured that's the fastest way to get folks in the door, is by us being the project sponsor and utilizing our property and our incentives to get folks to the table rather than waiting and hoping somebody wants to come and develop. That's what we figure is going to be the fastest route for us. So to know that a number of the responders are local, it tells us we've got a local pool of capacity that could still help to support this.
Yeah, I agree.
Other thoughts or ideas? Potential next steps. I know in some respects we may have to have some elements of this conversation again at the next meeting for those who weren't able to join us today. But anything in particular you might need from staff to get together in terms of information for you for our next conversation? There's some work I'm going to continue to do, especially around the housing NOLA model. So that is one of the things that I want to kind of also put on the table as a potential framework for us to look at how do we initiate a process for, starting that creation of a plan, right? I think that would be really helpful. Again, there's a model out there. We don't necessarily have to, work from whole cloth all over again.
Yeah.
But and I mean, and if nothing comes to mind in the moment, of course, obviously don't hesitate to call me or email me with any ideas that you might have that can be a part of the agenda.
I think you've given us a lot to chew on.
Good.
Marla, I was going to give you a call after the meeting to ask you a couple of questions around the some of the slide materials that you presented.
Okay.
So
sure. That's fine. Yeah,
okay.
No problem. Well, anything else to share for the good of the group before we sign off?
Not me.
Me either. Oh, I was going to ask you one question. I had to miss the last meeting, and I know did Paul do a presentation at the last meeting? I think I saw in the minutes.
He did, and he didn't do like a formal presentation, but we kind of talked through the ideas that he had, and so yeah, and he was one who was not able to come today as well. So, because I kept thinking I had heard from a couple of people who weren't able to be here today, and Paul was the other one.
Okay.
So I'm of the notion that have to take some of the ideas that he had, then these pieces that council just approved. I think we probably need to then just sit down and say, okay, where do we start?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there was some good discussion in the last meeting about that.
I'm not sure if it was recorded, but if it was, can I get a link to that recording and I'll take a
should
look
have
at it?
been. Yeah, I'll get with Larry because I do know Larry records all the meetings. So that's why he just asked me to record this one today. So we should have it. And that's actually one of the other things that we were thinking about doing. And it came up in that last meeting about whether we could post you all's names on the website. And I think it shows who the members are, but actually, a link to our other meetings and our materials on the city's webpage. Let me see, let me find that. Yeah. One of the questions was, while it had you all's names, I think a question came up about your contact information. And so that was one of those things where you all would kind of have to decide if you want to put your contact info out there or not. And obviously that's nothing that has to be decided today, since it's just a few of you here, but that was something that was mentioned, and it asked about the key documents being posted on that website as well, in addition to our OneDrive that we have. So that did come up, and I mean, it's a no-brainer to put the documents up, right?
Yeah, right.
And the recording. So the bigger question I think that'll be out there is whether you all want your contact info to be noted on the website as well. So we've got a few inside technical things we need to work out on our end in terms of the website and things of that nature. So we'll continue to work towards that as well.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.
All right, thank you, Marla.
Well, thank you all so much for your patience as we work through this technical glitch. And so I will just remind you, the invite that you have from Shavonda, take that out, just completely delete that from your system. And then the one that I sent will be the link going forward. And then I'll just update the agenda and stuff like I did today.
Okay.
All right. Well, you guys have a great one. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank
See ya.
you. You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.